The prison guard's keys jangled against the metal bars as he walked past my cell for the last time. 23 months, 17 days, and approximately 6 hours. That's how long I'd been counting down to this moment. My name is Ethan Morrison, and tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I walk out of Riverside Correctional Facility, a free man. But my wife, Jessica, and her family have no idea that the man they destroyed is coming back with something they never expected. Evidence. Mountains of it. And tomorrow isn't just my release date, it's the day their entire world collapses. 2 years ago, I was a senior software architect at Pinnacle Systems, pulling in $180,000 a year, living in a beautiful house in Westbrook Heights with my wife of 7 years. I had it all, or so I thought. Jessica was everything to me. We met at a tech conference in Seattle where she was working as an event coordinator. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and when she looked at me that first night, I knew my life had changed forever. Her sister Amber was always around, but I never minded. Family was important to Jessica, and I respected that. Amber was younger by 3 years, impulsive where Jessica was calculated, emotional where Jessica was composed. But she was family, and family mattered. Everything changed one night in October. Jessica and I had hosted a dinner party at our house. Nothing fancy, just close friends and family. Amber showed up late with her boyfriend, Travis, some real estate broker she'd been dating for 6 months. The guy had all the charm of a used car salesman and twice the sleaze. I never trusted him, but Amber was head over heels, planning their future together despite only knowing him half a year. That night, Travis was drinking heavily. By 9 p.m., he was slurring his words and making inappropriate jokes. I pulled Amber aside in the kitchen and suggested maybe it was time for them to head home. She got defensive immediately, told me I was being controlling, that I never liked Travis and was looking for excuses to criticize him. We argued, voices raised, and Jessica came in to mediate. I said things I shouldn't have said. Called Travis a liability, said Amber was making a mistake rushing into things with someone she barely knew. Amber left in tears, Travis stumbling behind her. 3 days later, I got the phone call that destroyed my life. Amber had been in a car accident. Travis was driving, drunk, wrapped their car around a telephone pole on Hamilton Street. Amber was 7 weeks pregnant, something she hadn't told anyone yet. She survived the crash with minor injuries, but she lost the baby. Jessica was inconsolable when she got the news. Her baby sister had lost her first child, and someone had to be blamed. That someone became me. Because I'd argued with Amber that night. Because I'd suggested they leave. Because according to Jessica's twisted logic, if I hadn't upset Amber, maybe she wouldn't have been in that car at all. Maybe she would have stayed at our house longer, delayed their departure, changed the timeline just enough that they wouldn't have been at that intersection at that exact moment. It was insane reasoning, but grief doesn't follow logic. Jessica's father, Richard Lansing, owned a commercial real estate empire worth over $200 million. He was the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted, used to bending the world to fit his narrative. And the narrative he created was that I had caused his youngest daughter's miscarriage by starting that argument. Within a week, Jessica had moved back to her parents' estate. Within 2 weeks, she'd filed a restraining order claiming I'd been emotionally abusive throughout our marriage. Within a month, I was arrested on fabricated domestic violence charges that Richard's lawyers had somehow manufactured, using carefully edited recordings and testimony from people who'd been paid to lie. The prosecutor was a family friend of the Lansings. The judge played golf with Richard every Thursday. I never stood a chance. My public defender was overworked and underprepared. When I tried to explain that the charges were false, that I'd never laid a hand on Jessica in anger, he just told me to take the plea deal. 2 years minimum security in exchange for pleading guilty to aggravated harassment and reckless endangerment. If I fought it and lost, I was looking at 5 to 7 years. So I took the deal because I was terrified and alone and couldn't afford the kind of lawyers who could fight the Lansing family machine. That was my first mistake. My second was thinking Jessica would eventually come to her senses and realize what she'd done. Every month, like clockwork, they came to visit me. Jessica, Amber, sometimes Richard himself. They'd sit across from me in the visitation room with these expressions of false concern, talking about forgiveness and healing and how I needed to take responsibility for what I'd done. Every single time, I refused to see them. The guards would come to my cell and tell me I had visitors, and every single time I'd say the same thing. No, I don't want to see them. Because I knew what they were doing. They were building their narrative, creating a record of the devoted family trying to reach out to the man who'd hurt them. Every refused visit became another piece of evidence in their story. Look how cold he is, how unrepentant. We tried to help him, but he refused. But what they didn't know was that I'd been busy too. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, to plan, to prepare. And when you've got a background in software architecture and data systems, you learn to see patterns, to find connections others miss. My cellmate for the first 8 months was a guy named Marcus Rodriguez, former forensic accountant who'd made the mistake of exposing his boss's embezzlement scheme. We became friends, and Marcus taught me things about financial investigation that my computer science degree had never covered. How to trace money through shell corporations, how to identify patterns in accounting records, how to find the gaps where money disappears and resources get redirected. During my limited computer access in the prison library, I started digging into the Lansing family finances. Not directly, I wasn't stupid enough to hack into anything from a prison computer. But public records are public records, and if you know where to look and what questions to ask, you can learn an awful lot. Richard Lansing's real estate empire looked impressive on paper, but there were cracks in the foundation. Properties purchased at inflated prices from shell companies that traced back to other properties he owned. Insurance claims on buildings that had mysterious fires just weeks after the policies were increased. Zoning variances that got approved impossibly fast for a man who happened to employ 3 city council members' children. I started keeping detailed notes, cross-referencing public records with news articles, building a timeline of questionable transactions going back 15 years. Then there was Amber's accident investigation. The police report was matter of public record, and something about it bothered me. Travis had been driving drunk, that was clear. Blood alcohol level of 0.17, more than twice the legal limit. But the accident happened at 11:47 p.m., more than 2 hours after they left our house. Where had they been during those missing hours? The crash site was on Hamilton Street, which was nowhere near the route from our house to Amber's apartment. I filed Freedom of Information requests for traffic camera footage from that night. It took 6 months and 3 appeals, but eventually I got access to digital files that showed Travis's car had stopped at a bar called the Copper Room on West Side Avenue at 10:23 p.m. They'd been inside for 47 minutes. I could see them entering on the exterior camera footage. Travis was already stumbling, and Amber was laughing, hanging on his arm. When they left, Travis had a fresh drink in his hand that he was sipping as he got into the driver's seat. So much for my argument sending them to their doom. They'd gone drinking after leaving our house, gotten even more intoxicated, and then Amber had let her drunk boyfriend drive her home. But Jessica's family had convinced themselves and everyone else that I was responsible, that my harsh words had set in motion a chain of events that ended in tragedy. My former colleague at Pinnacle Systems, a guy named Derek Chen, visited me in month 14. He was one of the few people from my old life who believed in my innocence. Derek told me that Jessica had liquidated all our joint assets within 3 months of my imprisonment. Our house had been sold. The money disappeared into accounts I couldn't trace from inside. Our investment portfolio, gone. Even the car I'd bought before we were married had been sold. Everything we'd built together, eliminated. And Jessica was living comfortably at her parents' estate, working as the director of charitable giving for her father's company, a made-up position that paid her $150,000 a year to attend galas and have her picture taken with local politicians. But Derek brought me something more valuable than information about my stolen assets. He brought me access. Derek still worked at Pinnacle Systems, and he'd noticed something interesting. The company had contracted with Lansing Commercial Properties for their new office expansion. Part of that contract involved integrating Pinnacle's project management software with Lansing's internal systems for coordinating the construction schedule. And Derek, as Senior Systems Integration Specialist, had administrative access to both networks. I spent the next 6 months walking Derek through exactly what to look for and where to find it. Not hacking, I was very careful about that. Just legitimate access to systems he was already authorized to use, pulling reports and data that were technically within his purview as part of the integration project. What he found was incredible. Richard Lansing had been running a sophisticated real estate fraud scheme for over a decade. He'd purchase properties through one company at market rate, then immediately sell them to another company he secretly controlled at twice the price. The second company would take out massive loans using the inflated property values as collateral, money that would then get funneled back to Richard through consulting fees and management contracts. When the second company inevitably defaulted on the loans, Richard's primary company would swoop in and buy the properties at foreclosure prices, having essentially used bank money to acquire real estate at a fraction of its actual value. It was brilliant and completely illegal, and Derek had found documentation of 47 properties that had gone through this cycle. We're talking about $89 million in fraudulent transactions. But the real bombshell was what Derek found in Jessica's email account. As director of charitable giving, she had access to the Lansing Foundation's financial systems. The foundation was supposed to be giving away millions to local charities, building Richard's reputation as a philanthropist while providing hefty tax deductions. Except most of the charities were fake, shell organizations with no actual operations. The money was being funneled right back into Richard's network of companies or used to pay off the people who helped maintain his schemes. Jessica wasn't just complicit, she was actively managing the fraud. Her emails showed she'd personally approved payments to fictional charities, had meetings with lawyers about maintaining the paper trail, had even discussed concerns about auditors getting too close to discovering the truth. And then there was Amber. Sweet, tragic Amber who'd lost her baby and helped send me to prison for supposedly causing it, Derek found. Text messages between Amber and Travis from the night of the accident. Messages sent after they left our house. Travis writing how much he wanted to get wasted and forget about that uptight brother-in-law who couldn't mind his own business. Amber responding that she needed drinks too, that she was tired of me judging her choices, that Travis was the best thing that ever happened to her. Messages time-stamped at 10:31 p.m. from inside the copper room, Amber telling Travis she loved him and didn't care what anyone else thought. Messages that proved beyond any doubt that they'd made their own choices that night, that my argument had nothing to do with the crash that happened over an hour later. I had Derek organize everything into encrypted files, backed up in 3 separate cloud storage locations that no one knew about. Financial records, email chains, text message logs, traffic camera footage, police reports, everything cross-referenced and time-stamped and organized like the software architecture documentation I used to create at Pinnacle. A comprehensive map of the Lansing family's crimes, including the conspiracy to falsely imprison me. But I didn't go to the police, not yet. Because police could be bought, especially by men like Richard Lansing. Prosecutors could be influenced. Evidence could mysteriously disappear. No, I needed something more reliable, more permanent, more public. Derek connected me with an investigative journalist named Sarah Mitchell, who'd been trying to expose Richard Lansing for years. She worked for the Chicago Tribune and had a reputation for taking down corrupt businessmen. But she'd never been able to get enough evidence to publish because Richard's lawyers would threaten lawsuit before the ink was dry. When Derek showed her what we had, she practically wept with joy. This wasn't just enough evidence. It was an overwhelming avalanche of documentation that would bury Richard Lansing's empire and everyone connected to it. We planned the timing carefully. Sarah would hold the story until the day of my release, then publish everything simultaneously. The Chicago Tribune would run the main investigative piece. The documentation would be released to the FBI, the SEC, the State Attorney General's office, and every major news outlet in the region. All at once, all coordinated, giving Richard no time to spin the story or intimidate anyone into silence. My release date was set for November 15th. Sarah's story was scheduled to publish online at 8 a.m. that same morning, hitting print editions the next day. By the time I walked out of Riverside Correctional Facility, the Lansing family's world would already be on fire. The guards started treating me differently in my final week. Not better exactly, but different. Like they knew something was coming but couldn't quite figure out what. I'd kept my head down for 23 months, never caused problems, just served my time quietly while building my case. None of them could have guessed what was about to happen. On November 14th, my last night in prison, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk thinking about everything that had been taken from me. My freedom, my career, my reputation, my marriage, 2 years of my life. Tomorrow, I'd walk out with nothing but the clothes I'd been arrested in and $40 in prison discharge money. No job, no home, no wife, no future. Except that wasn't quite true. Derek had arranged an apartment for me, prepaid for 6 months. He'd also connected me with 3 different tech companies that were interested in hiring me once my legal situation was resolved. The night before release, an interesting thing happened. One of the guards, Officer Patterson, came by my cell around 10 p.m. He was in his 50s, close to retirement, had always been decent to me during my time inside. "Morrison," he said quietly, "I don't know what you did or didn't do to end up here, but I've worked this job for 27 years, and I can tell the difference between dangerous men and decent men who got screwed over. Whatever happens after you leave here, you make sure you do it the right way. Stay clean, stay legal, don't give them any reason to send you back." I promised him I would, and I meant it. Everything I'd planned was completely legal. Exposing crimes isn't a crime, and the truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Richard Lansing had sent an innocent man to prison to protect his daughter's feelings and maintain his family's narrative. Tomorrow, he'd learn that some prices are too high, even for men with $200 million empires. Morning came with the usual prison sounds: metal doors clanging, guards shouting orders, hundreds of men starting another day behind bars. Except for me, this was my last morning. I went through processing, signing forms, collecting my personal effects that had been stored for 23 months. My wallet was there, but empty, all my credit cards canceled. My phone was so outdated it was basically useless. My wedding ring, which I hadn't worn since the day of my arrest, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds when they handed it to me. I left it on the processing desk. At exactly 8 a.m., the prison's main door opened, and I walked out into November sunshine that seemed brighter than I remembered. Derek was waiting for me in the parking lot, standing next to his car with a huge smile on his face. "Brother," he said, embracing me, "welcome back to the world. You did it. We did it." "Is it live?" I asked. He pulled out his phone and showed me the Chicago Tribune's website. The headline read, "Real estate mogul Richard Lansing faces federal investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud scheme." The subheadline was even better. "Tribune investigation reveals decade of false charities, shell companies, and fabricated property values. Local businessman's daughter implicated in conspiracy." My hands shook as I scrolled through the article. Sarah Mitchell had done an incredible job, laying out the entire scheme in clear, devastating detail. Photos of documents, screenshots of emails, financial charts showing money flowing through the network of shell companies. Everything we'd gathered over 18 months of careful investigation, now public record, now undeniable evidence. Derek's phone started buzzing with news alerts. The FBI had announced they were opening an official investigation. The SEC was reviewing trading records. The Illinois Attorney General was calling for a special prosecutor. It was happening exactly as we'd planned, except faster and bigger than I'd dared to hope. We drove to my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom place in Riverside Commons, far from my old neighborhood, but clean and affordable. Derek had furnished it with basics, and there was a new laptop waiting for me on the desk. Most importantly, there was a burner phone with one number programmed into it, Sarah Mitchell's direct line. I called her immediately. "Ethan," she said, picking up on the first ring. "Welcome to freedom. How does it feel? Like I can finally breathe?" "Thank you, Sarah. You did all this." "No, you did this. I just helped get it into print." My editor's already getting calls from Richard Lansing's lawyers threatening to sue for defamation. I told them good luck with that since everything in the article is documented fact. "What happens next?" I asked. "Now we wait. The FBI will take weeks to build their case, but with the evidence you provided, they've got enough to start seizing records and freezing assets." "Richard can't hide from this, Ethan. This isn't some local scandal that gets swept under the rug. This is federal fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. We're talking about decades in federal prison if they're convicted." My old phone, which Derek had gotten reactivated with a new number, started ringing constantly. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters trying to get my side of the story. I let them all go to voicemail. Then one call came through that I recognized, Jessica's number. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing with this, but you need to stop." "Stop what?" "Telling the truth? You're destroying our family. You sent fabricated evidence to the FBI. My father's lawyers are going to prove everything in that article is lies." "Is that what he told you?" I asked calmly. "That everything's fabricated?" "Because it's not, Jessica. Every document, every email, every bank record is real. And you know they're real because you personally approved half of those fake charity payments." "I never," she started, but I cut her off. "Yes, you did. I have emails with your signature authorizing payments to Children's Future Foundation, which doesn't exist. Elder Care Alliance, which is just a P.O. box. Community Health Initiative, which is your father's accountant's cousin pretending to run a nonprofit. You didn't just know about the fraud, Jessica. You helped run it." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "How?" she finally whispered. "How did you get those emails?" "They were on secure servers. Derek Chen says hello. He spent 14 months pulling data from systems he had legitimate access to as part of the Pinnacle Integration Project. Everything was legally obtained, properly documented, and thoroughly verified. Your father's lawyers can't make this go away." "You lied to me," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "You made me think you were just accepting your punishment, that you were taking responsibility. I never lied to you. I just stopped trying to convince you of the truth. You chose to believe I hurt Amber because that narrative was easier than accepting that she made her own choices that night. You chose to support your father's vendetta because family loyalty mattered more than justice. Those were your choices, Jessica. Now you get to live with them." She hung up without another word. I sat on the couch in my new apartment, holding a phone that used to represent my connection to the woman I loved, and felt absolutely nothing. Derek stayed with me that first day, helping me set up the apartment and catch up on 2 years of world events I'd missed. We ordered pizza, and I ate real food that wasn't prison cafeteria garbage for the first time in 23 months. That night he brought over his laptop and we watched the news together. Every local station was running the story. Richard Lansing's face appeared on screen after screen, looking older and harder than I remembered. He was standing outside his office building surrounded by lawyers, reading a prepared statement denying all allegations and promising to vigorously defend his reputation. But his eyes told a different story. He knew this was bad, knew that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling. By morning, 3 more developments had occurred. The FBI had raided Lansing Commercial Properties headquarters, leaving with dozens of boxes of documents. The Illinois Attorney General had frozen the Lansing Foundation's assets pending investigation. And most satisfying of all, Jessica had been placed on administrative leave from her position as Director of Charitable Giving while the company conducted an internal review. I spent my second day of freedom doing something I'd dreamed about for 2 years. I filed a civil lawsuit against Jessica, Richard, Amber, and the prosecutor who'd helped fabricate charges against me. Wrongful prosecution, malicious prosecution, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, every cause of action my new lawyer could think of. My attorney, Michael Bradford, was a former prosecutor himself who'd left the district attorney's office after seeing too many innocent people railroaded by the system. When Derek had showed him my case, he'd agreed to take it on contingency. "With everything that's come out," Michael said during our first meeting, "you've got an incredibly strong case. The prosecutor who handled your case, Davis Campbell, he's already being investigated for misconduct in 6 other cases. The fact that he played golf with Richard Lansing and then pursued charges against you that fell apart under any real scrutiny, that's textbook corruption." "What are our chances?" I asked. "In civil court? Honestly, Ethan, I'd say better than 90%. The criminal case against them is even stronger, but that's not our department. We just need to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that they knowingly participated in getting you falsely imprisoned. And based on the documentation you've gathered, that's going to be remarkably easy." Day 3 brought another surprise. Travis Blake, Amber's boyfriend who'd been driving drunk the night of the accident, reached out through his lawyer. He wanted to meet with me. "Why would I meet with him?" I asked Michael. "Because his attorney says he's willing to testify about pressure he received from the Lansing family to support their narrative about you causing the accident. Apparently, Richard Lansing paid off Travis's legal fees from the DUI charge in exchange for Travis agreeing not to mention that he and Amber had gone drinking after leaving your house." We met at Michael's office. Travis looked terrible, like the guilt had been eating him alive for 2 years. He was sober now, had been for 18 months, and was working as a warehouse supervisor trying to rebuild his life. "I'm sorry," he said before I'd even sat down. "I'm so sorry for what I let them do to you." I was scared and broke, and Richard Lansing offered to make all my problems disappear if I just kept my mouth shut about that night. "You know what really happened?" I said. It wasn't a question. "We went to the copper room after we left your place. Amber wanted to keep partying, said she needed to blow off steam after your argument. I was already drunk from your dinner party, but she insisted. We did 3 more rounds of shots, and when we left, I was completely wasted. She knew I was too drunk to drive, but she got in the car anyway. She didn't even try to stop me. The accident was entirely our fault, not yours." Richard Lansing knew that, he continued. He saw the police report, saw the bar receipts, knew the timeline didn't support their story about you causing it. But Amber was devastated about losing the baby, and Jessica was furious, and they needed someone to blame. Richard decided that someone would be you. He offered me $75,000 to stay quiet about the bar and let them build their narrative. I took the money because I was facing prison time for the DUI and vehicular assault charges. I'm not proud of it. Travis's testimony was going to destroy what was left of the Lansing family's credibility. Michael recorded everything, had Travis sign an affidavit, and added it to our growing mountain of evidence. By the end of week 1, the dominoes were falling faster than I could track. The SEC had charged Richard Lansing with securities fraud and wire fraud. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include 12 other businessmen who'd participated in his property schemes. Jessica had been formally fired from Lansing Commercial Properties and was facing potential criminal charges for her role in the charity fraud. Amber had gone into hiding, reportedly staying with relatives in Michigan. The prosecutor, Davis Campbell, had been suspended pending a Bar Association ethics investigation, and my lawsuit was proceeding on an expedited schedule because the judge, who had no connection to the Lansing family, was appalled by what he'd read in the case filings. I was working again. Derek had gotten me a contract position at Pinnacle Systems doing the same software architecture work I'd done before my life fell apart. My boss, Linda Ramirez, had followed my case and believed in my innocence from day 1. "Welcome back," she said when I walked into the office for the first time. "We never should have let you go. I'm just glad to be working again." Linda smiled. "You're not just working, Ethan. We're offering you a full-time position as senior architect, $210,000 salary plus equity. You'll be leading the platform redesign project I've been holding for someone I could trust." 3 months after my release, the criminal indictments came down. Richard Lansing was charged with 47 counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Jessica was charged with 12 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Davis Campbell was charged with obstruction of justice and official misconduct. Amber wasn't charged criminally but was named as a material witness. The trial was scheduled for next spring, and Michael assured me our civil case would proceed right after the criminal trial concluded. The evidence was simply overwhelming. 6 months after my release, I stood in a courthouse where Richard Lansing was being arraigned on federal charges. He looked 20 years older, broken in a way that money couldn't fix. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw recognition and something else. Fear. Not fear of prison, but fear of a man he'd underestimated. A man he'd tried to destroy who'd spent 2 years planning the perfect revenge. Not with violence, not with illegal schemes, but with the one thing Richard Lansing couldn't buy his way out of, the truth. After the hearing, Sarah Mitchell found me in the hallway. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Watching him face justice?" I thought about that question. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like accounts being balanced. I didn't want revenge, Sarah. I just wanted the truth to matter. The truth does matter. Your case has already led to reforms in the prosecutor's office. 3 other people whose cases were handled by Davis Campbell are being reviewed. You did more than save yourself, Ethan. You exposed a system that was broken. That night, I sat in my apartment and did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I slept, peacefully, without the weight of injustice pressing on my chest, without the anger that had sustained me through 23 months of imprisonment. Jessica's final call came 8 months after my release. She was crying, something I'd never heard her do even during our worst arguments. "I'm going to prison," she said simply. "My lawyer says I'll probably get 18 months in a minimum security facility. Dad's looking at 15 to 20 years. Our whole family is destroyed. Do you feel better now? Is this what you wanted?" I didn't want any of this. this. I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted people to know I didn't hurt Amber. I wanted the people who knowingly sent an innocent man to prison to face consequences. If that destroyed your family, Jessica, that's because your family chose to build itself on lies. There was a long silence. I loved you, she finally said. I really did. I loved you too. But love isn't enough when it's built on a foundation of lies and injustice. You chose your family's version of events over the truth. You chose to believe I was capable of the things they accused me of. Those choices have consequences. I hung up and blocked her number. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. A year after my release, the civil trial concluded. The jury awarded me $8.7 million in damages. Richard Lansing's real estate empire had been dismantled, his assets seized or sold to pay restitution to the banks he'd defrauded. There wouldn't be enough to pay my full judgment, but Michael was confident we'd collect at least $4 million, more than enough to rebuild my life. 2 years after my release, I stood in front of a congressional committee testifying about prosecutorial misconduct and the need for reform in how domestic violence cases are investigated. My story had become a cautionary tale about what happens when wealthy, powerful families are allowed to manipulate the justice system. 3 years after my release, I published a book about my experience. Derek helped me write it, organizing 3 years of documentation into a narrative that read like a legal thriller, except it was all true. The book became a bestseller, spawning a documentary and eventually a limited series on Netflix. I donated most of the proceeds to organizations that help the wrongly convicted. 4 years after my release, I married Rebecca, a lawyer I'd met through Michael's firm. She understood what I'd been through, had spent her career defending people who'd been failed by the system. We bought a house together, nothing fancy but honest and real, built on truth instead of lies. 5 years after my release, I received a letter from Jessica. She'd served her sentence and was trying to rebuild her life, working as an administrative assistant at a small nonprofit that actually did real charitable work. The letter was an apology, not the performative kind she'd offered during those prison visits, but genuine remorse for the role she'd played in destroying my life. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't expect a response. She just wanted me to know that she understood now what she'd done, that she'd spent every day of her prison sentence thinking about the innocent man she'd helped imprison. I never responded to the letter. Some things can't be forgiven, can only be acknowledged and moved past. Richard Lansing died in federal prison during his 10th year of incarceration. Heart attack, probably brought on by the stress of losing everything he'd built. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no grief, just the neutral acknowledgement that a chapter had finally closed. Amber eventually reached out through a mutual friend, wanting to apologize and explain. I declined to meet with her. Whatever explanations she had for her role in what happened didn't matter anymore. The past was past, and I'd built a future that didn't include the people who'd tried to destroy me. Looking back now, 6 years after walking out of Riverside Correctional Facility, I realized something important. The Lansing family thought they were punishing me for something I didn't do. They thought they were protecting Amber from blame, maintaining their family's reputation, solving their problem with money and influence. But what they actually did was give me something I never had before, absolute clarity about what mattered. My 2 years in prison taught me that truth is the only currency that matters, that justice delayed isn't justice denied if you're patient and methodical, that some battles are won not with fists or lawyers, but with documentation and determination. I lost 2 years of my life, but I gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive the worst and come out stronger, that I could face injustice and fight back without becoming the monster they accused me of being. That revenge doesn't have to be violent or illegal. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply exposing the truth and letting it do what truth does best, destroy the lies that people have built their lives upon. If you found value in this story, if it made you think about justice, family, or the price of truth, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear about standing up against injustice even when the odds are impossible. Leave a comment below about a time when truth mattered more than convenience, when doing the right thing cost you something but you did it anyway. And subscribe to this channel for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, about the battles we fight not with weapons but with integrity, evidence, and the stubborn refusal to let lies win. Because everyone has the capacity to be destroyed by injustice, But everyone also has the capacity to fight back, to refuse to stay down, to turn their prison cell into a war room and their release date into Judgment Day. My name is Ethan Morrison, and I spent 2 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. The day I was released was the day my wife and her family lost everything. Not because I wanted revenge, but because truth always wins in the end. You just have to be patient enough to let it work.